we'll kick things off with Brian Doyle. I mean, Brian doesn't need an introduction. Everybody knows Brian,
Come on,
and
that's not true.
sorry.
I don't need an introduction because I don't have that ego, but I don't think
With
everybody knows
Brian
who I am.
Doyle. Yeah, yeah. So we will do an introduction of Brian, no, because I mean, for those out on in YouTube that aren't familiar with Brian, but today we're going to talk about a topic. Your customers never needed you more than they do right now, and so we're going to jump into that. Brian will dig a bit deeper into that. We do know that our technical landscape continues to evolve, and as MSPs, we're faced with new threats every single day. But there's a flip side to this that Brian's going to talk about, and it's the same challenges create huge opportunities. So, with all these challenges, whether it be customers demanding more guidance around AI, of course, security and automation, that's just intensified. So I'm excited to have Brian here. Brian with VCIO Toolbox. And as Brian was talking just a moment ago, he was a former MSP, which I love. And in fact, I was just speaking yesterday. We had a webinar with one of our sponsors, and we were talking about how he had spent 15, 20 years in the MSP world. And I love those scenarios where, you move to the dark side, the vendor side, and, being able to bring that experience, being an MSP, bring that experience, I think is invaluable. But with that being said, Brian, I'd love to have you give a little more of an introduction of yourself and
Sure.
VCIO Toolbox, if you could.
Yeah, no doubt. So, as Dan alluded to, I was an MSP, for about 16, 17 years, probably the first 10 or 11, operated our own MSP. We also built a couple data centers. After our exit from there, I became a hired gun, which allowed me to work with some enterprise level managed services, which is a different animal as well. Again, building a couple data centers as a hired gun for this organization, but working with customers that really were in the Fortune 1000 realm. And they just gave me a lot of different perspectives on how to engage clients, how to communicate to them, and ultimately what people really wanted. So, as you said, a lot of us go from the good side to the dark side and become vendors as we make our exits. And I think most of us we do it well intentioned, right? We want to solve a problem that we had and try to find a better way to tackle that problem. For us, the problem was really the customer engagement portion of it. Very early on in our life cycle as an MSP, we saw that kind of around year two, year three, we started getting a little bit of churn into our lives. And when we first looked at that churn, it was basically two lower cost MSPs, and you chalked it up for all these guys are underpaying, forcing the commodity, all that great stuff that we hear out there. But when we really did an analysis of it and got to speak with some of those customers about why they were exiting, we found out the real problem was they just looked at us as hands and feet that fix things. They didn't know that there was anything else to that relationship. So thus, feeling like that it was a commodity, they treated us like a commodity. And that's
Yeah.
when we started putting together a process to really engage our customers, whether you want to call it QBR, TBR, SBR, whatever it is, we really started working with that. And when I came to the vendor side, that was really the mission that we went on, but also because I had extensive experience in the compliance realm, running a couple data centers for a number of years. We know that compliance is a supporting part of that conversation. So when we brought VCIO Toolbox to market, we came first out with the business review module, really allowed us to kind of attack the market where the conversation was happening. The MSPs were looking to get closer. Quite candidly, that was also around the COVID time. So obviously, staying engaged with your customer remotely was something that we found ourselves needing to do quick, fast, and have a standardized way to do it. So that certainly helped foster some of our early growth. But we had always planned on bringing in a GRC side to that platform as well. So you can really have a unified account management and advisory platform. And that's really what we look at VCIO Toolbox as today. It's really a system to allow you to do all the soft skills you do with your customer, manage meetings, touch points, compliance, considerations, really the cyber program, and ensure that you're tracking risk at all levels so you can really better communicate to your customers the next steps that they need to take.
Excellent. And you guys have done quite an incredible job helping MSPs on that side of the business, and we will talk more specifically in some of those areas. But one of the things I wanted to jump into, Brian, is our topic title today, which is that customers have never needed MSPs more than they do right now, and so I'd love to have you elaborate in that area. Why do
Yeah.
you think this is the moment that it's so critical?
Well, we'll give the credit first to Jay McBain. This comes off a
Okay.
statistic that he put out there with Canalys, of course, and it really what he showcased, and this hit me a couple of years ago, was that in 2021, the global market share for service providers or for the for the channel as a whole, I shouldn't say the channel as a whole, but for the technology environment was 3.5 billion. It's expected to grow to 7 billion by 2031. So it looks like a lot of opportunity for growth in there, right? But the channel today receives about 2.1 billion of that market share, but it's only expected to grow to 2.3 according to Jay by 2031. So only a couple $100 million worth of growth in an industry that's doubling in that time frame. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is just the changing market on how software, hardware, and other things are being sold, right? It's moving to a marketplace environment. There's more direct sales going on. A lot of the bigger vendors are pulling back, some of that channel sales and making it a little bit more difficult to work with. So that is taking away some of the potential market share for MSPs there. But there's a good news and a silver lining to this. Channel partners are expected to facilitate 90% of the deals. So when you think, for those of you that might have gray hair like myself here, Dan, back when we were working, I got into IT in the late 90s, let's call it mid 90s, late 90s. It was all about solution sales. It was getting the customer to understand the why behind things to drive those other outcomes. And oftentimes we would discount hardware to get the services side and things like that. Today, it's the same thing. Your customers need you so much today because there's a lot of things in the ecosystem they need to connect. Emerging technologies like, RPA, other automation technologies, AI, and certainly, continual growing threats around security. It can be really confusing for the end users, or for our customers. And they need somebody to be the Sherpa to help them get there to the other side. And that's really what, we're trying to help with the VCIO Toolbox is how do you build a story that tells or shows the customer outcomes they helped contribute and build, so they can understand where they should be making their technology investments and what risk they might be taking on if they decide to not move forward with those projects.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about that aspect of business outcome. I mean, I think business outcome, business outcome, business outcome, and stop talking tech, right? So I think we continue to talk about that, but I feel like we need to get more granular in helping MSPs determine uh, what is it the what are those business outcomes that the client is looking for, whether it's a business owner, a business leader. How do we determine? I feel like the answer should be pretty simple. You ask them, but I think it is more than that, right? I mean, we have to have strategic conversations with them to try to identify what is important to them, but there's no reason why we can't have some fuel to bring with us, some firepower in learning about their industry, looking to trade associations for whatever industry they might be in, and getting a better understanding of what is happening out there. Do you have any thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about getting more strategic with your customers. I found some humor in some of the fact that that seems to be an expanding conversation because it's been our tent pole really since day one. But
Yeah.
really, when you think about strategy, it's really, as you said, it's better understanding what the customer's key initiatives are and the obstacles they're facing, not just from a technology perspective, but overall in their business. Certainly as service providers, our goals are always going to be around the technology, delivering it solidly to our customers and making sure the right solutions are in place. But we're almost being forced to be part management consultant and starting to
Hmm.
understand a little bit more about how our clients' businesses operate so we can help them get to better outcomes ultimately, with their clients. So when I look at strategy and engaging a client, it's simply We need to learn more about them, and we need to get them out of the mindset that we're just the hands and feet to fix things, that they just should be talking to us about technology, and really help them better understand that, hey, really what you need to be doing is sharing with us what your big goals are, because oftentimes technology influences it or plays a part, maybe silently, that you weren't aware of in supporting those goals and initiatives.
Yeah. And, and I think too, it comes down to just that overall, it's beyond operational maturity of the MSP organization, but I think it's, just that overall business maturity. You're as an MSP, we're looking at how do we grow our business? We're looking at what challenges we have in our business, and we need to carry those type of conversations over to their business, and and also, I think we need to not be afraid to ask the difficult questions. If we are talking about things in their business, where are their struggles? Where, from a profitability perspective, what's holding them back? From a client experience, what's holding them back? Where are those bottlenecks? I feel like some might think this is outside of my lane. This
Yeah.
isn't my responsibility. This is, I don't have this experience to be asking them, or I'm not qualified to be asking them those conversations. But we need to be having those conversations because that's how we can leverage technology to help them overcome those challenges that they have.
Yeah, I always go back to asking questions and saying you don't know are two of your best weapons that are out there when you're talking to a customer. Because if you don't know an answer, your job is to know where to find it, right? So if you're not
Yeah.
feeling confident in engaging with the customer, I always say do it in a different fashion. Think about the win that's in it for them. Oftentimes what we teach, as people come into VCIO toolboxes, there's four core objectives to building a strategic plan. The first one's very simply, we want to be a better partner to you. And to be a better partner to you, we need to be more in tune on what the key initiatives and obstacles you're facing on the way to whatever you perceive success to be, whether they're technology or not. Then the second point of, building out a more strategic outcome with the customer is we want to bring the IT goals into the plan. Now we have to showcase our skills, right? Hey, these are the things that we think you need to consider within the plan. But then you got to highlight the win for them, which is, and the reason we're doing this is it becomes a check and balance system. We want to build a more transparent roadmap process. We don't want you to think we're just showing up with projects that we want to put in front of you because that's our goal, our aim. We want to show you how those projects are going to drive better outcomes for you. And by sharing these goals with us, we have to show alignment to these goals for a project to even be part of your roadmap. If we can't make that alignment, it's probably something you're not ready for in your environment yet. And then the final objective, in building a strategic plan with the customer is really showing progress. As those projects get adopted and deployed, you want to showcase that movement so they can start measuring, did they get the business benefit? Did they get the outcome they were looking for? And if you look at strategy as a win-win process, and if you always come from the mindset, what is the person across the table from me going to gain by doing this? And you really put yourself in their shoes, it's going to help you get that conversation moving faster. It's going to get your customer more open to contribute because some of them will be a little bit guarded. What do you want to know my goals for? What are you trying to sell me, right? So you got to really
Yeah.
help them with that. Hey, we want to use this as a check and balance system. We want to use this as a way to make sure that we can measure your outcomes. We want you to see that ROI so you're more in control about making an informed decision about go or no go versus just taking us on blind faith and trust.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I've had had these type of conversations have been part of my discussion with clients from day one, and and I will say what's most amazing is you continue to have these conversations with your clients. They become more open with additional questions. All of a sudden, you'll be having a QBR or TBR, and you're looking at the clock, and you're like, wow, this is way longer. They're way more engaged than they've ever been. And they're having discussions with me about things that I had never, ever imagined they would be having discussions with me. And that means they value what you have to say. That means they trust you. And you won. I mean, you have won at that point.
Well, we always say that, we need to get a seat at the C table, the C-level table, right? We need to become part of their executive team when they don't have a CIO. But the only way we can do that is by building trust. And building trust is driving value. And again, these are such overused words in our term, right? Our field. But driving value is just understanding them better. Think about your personal relationships. Which ones do you get the most mileage out of? The ones where you know the person the best, where you've asked questions, where you've gotten to learn about them, and now they feel more open to share with you. And business relationships are no different. The more we really
Yeah.
listen, the old two ears, one mouth kind of thing, the more we're going to understand what their point of view is, where they're coming from. And then this allows us to then insert our agenda where we need to, especially if it's a mutual agenda. And that's really what we're trying to build here is kind of a mutually
Right.
beneficial process.
And for everybody listening, whether you're on YouTube or you're live here in the call, please feel free to throw out any questions that you have. Um, if everybody has their bingo card out, let's throw out one of our keywords here, AI. Does anybody have AI on their bingo card?
So, when you
I don't
start
think
talking
A is
about
on a
AI,
bingo card.
What was that, Jay?
I don't think A is on a bingo card.
That's true. That is true. But yeah, so I mean, AI. Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
well, I mean, AI, right? Biggest buzzword out there, and it
Yeah,
has so many interpretations and meanings. But I think that's really where the opportunity is for the MSP. It's not just educating what AI can potentially do, right? Customers are starting to get a feel for that. But if you start understanding how they operate their business, and start understanding, what the capabilities of AI are, you can start matching up where AI might fit, right? One of the
yeah,
things that I'm seeing becoming a little bit more of a trend with the clients that we're working at is they're looking at, when they're doing their AI story, focusing on one or two of their primary verticals they're working with and really trying to understand how does the line of business application work because most of that's cloud based now. How does that interact with the tools they use like Microsoft 365? And what are the other tools that they can bring into the ecosystem to drive automation back into that line of business app? Take a healthcare concern. Their biggest, a lot of, if you have a local physician, their biggest thing is how quickly can I turn over the room, right? Well, one of the
yeah.
things that slows turning over the room is taking those notes. But there's plenty of AI applications out there geared to physicians to take those notes, transcribe them, and potentially integrate with the line of business app. These are conversations, even if you're not directly involved in the revenue portion of it, that you can be driving to those verticals you're working so they can seek more clearly where is the AI application in my business? What are the options that are there? And for some of our forward thinking MSPs, they're starting to take on these ecosystem tools, the ones that are not, they're not taking over the line of business application, but they're trying to find the tools that are going to help better automate better and create better experiences with those applications and the core applications they're using in the back office that they support today, with AI. So, when I look at AI, it's more how do you get a better understanding what your customers' needs are around it and then help them find the right solutions to discuss and hopefully move forward with.
So a couple things in one of them in one of its most simplest forms. My dad being in the hospital for the last 40 plus days, speaking to doctors and nurses. It's a lot of times it's just so much information, that they're throwing out and trying to comprehend it all. You have that emotional side of what you're going through, and then you're trying to, understand what they're saying. I use Otter. I use Otter to transcribe the conversation, and then I'll take that conversation and put it into ChatGPT or Gemini, usually ChatGPT, and just say, summarize this for me. And then I'll share this with family. And I have a couple brothers that aren't always nearby, so I'm able to just share that information. And it's just in its simplest form, being able to use AI from that perspective is a tremendous way. There's huge value. And another thing, we're, for everything MSP, for our sponsors, we're working on some reports to be able to show them, value that we provide with the different tools with our platform. And, Talon had put together a chart that showed various things, January through this last month. and I threw it into Claude. I don't know if anybody else uses Claude out there, but Claude is, has kind of a different spin. I like what some of the things that Claude does, but it came up with a very nice looking report. It took it from a black and white table and made it into a very pretty looking report. But I literally added a paragraph or a sentence that said, I want to be able to use this monthly. I want to be able to put in the vendor's name, and I want to be able to save these reports so that each month I can add some different variables into it. It literally developed all the code for me to be able to do this. And all I have to do is take this code and leverage this. And then there's a couple additional things I've added into it to come up with these reports. I just literally typed in another sentence saying I need it to be able to do this. I need to be able to save the report. I need to be able to pull it back up. And it did it, and it's like, the more that we leverage AI, the more that we ourselves are using that for our own businesses, it makes it easier to be able to help our clients see where AI can be used. And I've always been a firm believer is if you don't live it, you can't sell it. And we truly need to be leveraging AI in our business. And the two examples that I've just given, I think, are in the most simplest form. I mean, the first one, as far as using Otter to transcribe and ChatGPT to summarize, I mean, you can't get any more simpler than that. I mean, that is one of the most simplest things that you can do with AI. But taking a screenshot and throwing it into Claude and saying, I need this to look better. And then I turned it into an application that allows me to use this ongoing. I mean, that's huge, and those are the type of things that the more we live those scenarios, we can sell and help our clients take advantage of the whole AI momentum.
Well, I mean, Dan, what you just hit upon though is you understand the application. And I think this is where the opportunity is to really help our customers. We as technologists, we've jumped on this AI bandwagon as any tool that's come before us,
Yeah.
in the evolving technology cycles we've all lived through. And we roll up our sleeves and really try to learn this information deep dive, right? Our customers do not. They don't necessarily have the same passion for it. They don't necessarily understand where to start. The people that are
Right.
sitting across from us, especially in the MSP world, tend to be more traditional business people. And while they might have some tech savvy, they're generally not IT pros. So what they're looking for is what you just became in that equation for your, especially your family. You became the translator. You were the one that
Mhm.
said, this is how you use the tools, this is how I can get the output we want, and this is the information we need to now focus on. And by becoming that translator, you're really helping guide them to where these tools might fit within their business. And that's why, again, if you don't start digging deeper into understanding how your customer operates as a whole, you're just shooting darts at a wall, hoping you hit a bullseye when it comes to putting the right AI tools out there, because you,
Yeah.
you don't really understand where they might fit within the organization and where the biggest benefit or the biggest challenge to overcome can be benefited by it.
Yeah, and the other thing too is because as technologists we take things for granted, something again, I go back to the most simplest form of Otter to transcribe and ChatGPT to summarize. Okay, I mean, for us, it's like, hey, we could do this in our sleep, and like you're saying, our clients don't know that. So we take things for granted and we miss opportunities because we take things for granted. We think, oh, anybody knows how to do this.
Mhm.
Someone can figure this out. They don't need me. Yes, they do. And that's why going to the topic, our clients need us now more than ever.
And when you go back to, why your customer stalls on buying, you've already established they have budget, but now they're holding off. It's because they're not seeing the benefit, they're not seeing the return on it, thus they're reluctant to pull the trigger on things, right? And that's where by better digging into what they need, it's going to help you convey that within the message and hopefully get rid of some of that challenge as well that we all face.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about another topic that is on the bingo cards, not going away. In fact, it's maybe even more important with the introduction of AI is cybersecurity.
Yep.
Security first. And, with threats evolving on a daily basis, what does a truly strategic security conversation look like between the MSP and clients? What does that look like?
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, that's why we always knew we were going to be swinging to compliance as part of the story with the business reviews as well, and then sharing things like our strategic plan with our customers across that realm as well. And it's because of the increased knowledge that customers have in security. For those of us that have been around for a while, getting your customers sometimes to upgrade firewalls, things that they just didn't understand what the functionality really was doing for them at one point in time could be difficult because it was just merely looked at as a cost. But then everybody started getting privacy letters from their favorite people, from their favorite credit cards or whatever,
Hmm.
saying that their data has now been stolen. And everybody became a little bit more in tune with what those threats look like. And I think in this day and age, we're all, like the Kevin Bacon game, one or two people removed from somebody that's been hit by a ransomware event. But we were recently doing some new marketing pieces and we got into some of the statistics that are out there, and I'll just share a couple with you. Cybercrime is going to cost businesses over 15.5 billion by 2029, globally. 4 out of 10 cyber claims are being denied, at least in part with carve outs or as a whole, because people, not intentionally, but didn't know what to put into the answers there. And thus, the thing that got breached, like let's take MFA as an example. They thought they had MFA because they have MFA in all the apps they use. Then marketing took all their personal data, put it up into a marketing tool. That got breached. And now the insurance company says, well, that didn't have MFA on it. We're not going to pay out that full claim there. And these are new threats that people are experiencing. 88% of the threats are coming from your own team. And this is where our
Mm,
stack no longer can fully support the problem, right? It
right.
gets into security and awareness training, which is part of our stack, of course. But then who's looking at those reports and actually taking action when people aren't taking their training, when they aren't, when they're clicking repeatedly on phishing articles, right? How are we analyzing that? And this has opened up a huge opportunity for the MSP to really take on potentially that oversight role as well. We're already delivering the stack. We've got the right tools to protect the perimeter, but now we've got to help the customers build the right policies so they've got the legal backing that they need when things happen within their environment, to build the right process and standard operating procedures around security, and to make sure there's a governance layer, whether that's supposed to be managed by the customer and then they're overseeing them there, or taking over that responsibility fully and making sure that regular meetings are occurring to look at where the riskiest users live and where the riskiest problems live. Build that risk management plan, quite frankly, and help customers
Those stats.
prioritize what they're facing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those stats that you threw out just took that prospect or that client from being disengaged
Yep.
in a conversation to being fully engaged by some stats that truly can affect them in their business. And when we keep it so high level, when we focus on being so high level, and we're just talking about technology in general, and you have to have this, and it's required, and um, once you start getting into some real stats that impact their business and something that they can relate to, it changes that conversation and it totally pulls them in, right?
Well, think about cyber projects that get delayed, right, by your customer. If you go to that small to mid-sized business owner, one of the senior managers there, and ask them how they rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5 in their appetite for risk, most of them will tell you that they're a 5, no appetite for risk whatsoever. And while that might be true about how they're managing finance and operations in their business, oftentimes cyber is not left or being looked at in that equation for them. They look at those projects that they're sitting on the table as, oh, that's not going to happen to me type issues, right? Your fear, uncertainty, and doubt conversation. But now when you look at risk and you say to them, hey, Dan, I saw you rated yourself a 5, and I'm sure you're spot on financially and operationally, but I got to make you aware as your IT leadership partner of some cyber risk on the table. I share this with you so you never get caught without this information, when you're talking to your board of directors, investors, or key clients. But here's where the risk lives, and you might be closer to a 4, maybe even a 3. Now all of a sudden those cyber projects take on a new meaning for them because it's about their risk. And I think that's something that we've never done a good job as a community until recently. I'm seeing more and more MSPs, making that turn of really helping the customer understand what are the impacts and likelihoods of these problems actually happening in their environment. What would it mean to them if somebody did breach their environment? What data is vulnerable? How much can that impact the business? Can it just take them out of business for a little while and they'll resume as is, covered off with paper? Or are they really going to potentially have data loss, have to report publicly, maybe damage reputation, those kind of things? And we are the stewards that can come in there and help them understand the impact. And then based on how they're architected, what's the likelihood of that risk occurring and what steps can they take to increase, to decrease that likelihood?
And that risk occurs in every business, regardless of size. Prime examples, going back to my dad's medical hospital experiences. I've been in 3 different hospital facilities, all large, and I have pictures from all 3 that show unattended and unlocked workstations. Most recently, just this past Monday, I have photographs of one hospital system in which the photos that I have show patients' photos, the room number that they're in, their diagnosis, their allergies, who their doctor is. I have, enormous amount of data that's showing that PHI, that health information about individuals. And these are all on the same floor. These are rooms near my dad. And these are large hospital chains that are large hospital organizations that, you think would have the epitome, they would like, they wouldn't miss a beat. But I walked by and saw all this data and was blown away. I don't want to share too much information because I have a podcast series that will be coming out again about this that will kind of walk through the journey of my reporting. That will include my reporting to the hospital as well as to HHS. And so I don't want to share too much, but that whole podcast series will be coming out shortly and will elaborate on the entire process. And
I just
but
I just Googled and they give you a 15% bounty,
oh,
whatever the
really?
fines are. Yeah.
There you go. Well, you never know, right? So
You've
and
also identified a market that's wrought for change because think about most emergency rooms, most floors, right? The way they're just laid out from a people perspective lends to that information being seen. That's the
yeah,
real challenge. It's such a public and open space, but yet privacy needs to be tantamount. And some of them are not making the investments into the tools to make it
no,
more private. Even simply screen, what are those little screen things you can hang and make sure that you can't see things from the left and the right at least.
exactly. Yeah. And yeah, in this case, I mean, it was one desk back and there was nobody in sight. Literally took my phone out, snapped a picture, and as I walked away, I was looking at the pictures. They weren't clear enough. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm going to go back. Still nobody there. And I stood there taking additional photos that were as clear as can be that showed, you know, the information on these patients. And so if this can happen in a big business, darn well it's happening in small organizations as well, right?
Yep, and I'll even counter. Sometimes the risk is larger for the smaller organizations because most of these security incidents, what's the answer to fix them? Money, right? Whether it's in the triage, whether it's in new tools, whether it's in paying off litigation. And the smaller your business is, the less capital you have to make those payoffs if something were to happen, right? So the risk
Yeah.
is much larger to you staying in operations based on that. There were stats about, I think I might even have one here that you know, about how many businesses close after. I thought I had it here, but I don't. But it was something like 60% of businesses don't make it after a breach. Most of them, it's just because they didn't have the capital to cover their costs, no matter what the
Right.
claims were.
And the problem is, I think a lot of those businesses think, still to this day, it won't happen to me. We are not a target. Nobody cares about who we are. My response to that has always been in the past, while hackers do know a lot of information of who you are when they're targeting, a lot of times they don't. They simply see an IP address. It's an IP address, so they don't know who you are, what you do, how big or small you are, how much money you have, or what kind of damage they can do. They will do whatever it takes to get that information, regardless of all that. And it's not like it's an individual, they're tools. I mean, they're leveraging tools to be able to carry these operations out. So, Mr. Business Owner, Mr. Business Leader, it will happen to you. It's the good old saying of, not if, but when.
Yep. Norm put up a great thing. Money is money to them, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes hitting five
Yeah,
singles is better than just one home run, man.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit more about just having those conversations, and what are some things that we can do to help them, beyond some of the stats that we talked about, just help them, better, become better engaged in the conversation so that they do understand how important this is, and help them down the right journey to making the investments that are necessary, whether it's monetary investments, but it could also be time investments, when it comes to like security awareness training and other things like that.
Well, if you always go with the mindset that people only buy for three reasons, right? It's either to make money, save money, or mitigate risk, right? Those are the key drivers to most buying cycles. You have to talk in those terms with your customers, right? Go back to what I said in the beginning. You have to dig deeper into what their needs are. If you understand their needs, then you can understand where the risks may live, and you might even be able to point out some of those risks to them. Then sit down with your customer and develop a risk management plan. I'm not here to talk tool per se, but in our tool, we have a very easy way to take anything that you identify as a gap, either in the business review process or the compliance process, and then convert it into a risk that goes into your risk register where you can add impact and probability. Impact and probability is where you're really going to have the story to help your customers see which risks are the biggest ones they need to attack and which ones they have to prioritize, and then which ones might be able to be attended to a little bit later down the cycle because the likelihood or the impacts might not be as high. And when you start giving customers, we always say don't give customers too many options, but we have to give them some. Everything can't be critical. Everything might not fit their budget. I've always said A priorities can very quickly become C priorities if budget isn't there, but then you got to work your customer to take some of those C priorities and move them up if budget allows. And we really have to work with our customer to help build that roadmap story that meets their capital needs, but is also addressing the critical needs. And then they have to change their habits. And that's where some of this opportunity of coming in as a VCISO as a service or a compliance as a service offering, where you're really going to work a little bit more embedded with them on changing the habits of their end users, of their own team, getting more review cycles on things, making sure, take the simplest thing. Does your customer call you up when they fire Brian today? And make sure you're turning off their services before, Brian leaves the door, because Brian might be disgruntled and go do something later, right?
Yeah.
And these are all trivial things that I'm sure you're already talking about all day with your customers. But if they're not doing it, that's risk, right? It's on the table, and those should be easy ones. They just need to engage you.
I got a client now that's suing an employee because he was making disparaging issues and whatnot. It's crazy.
And that's
He's
where policies and
making,
procedures come into play, right,
Mm.
Jay? I mean, the count non, we're going through our SOC 2 right now, and there's a lot of discussion about confidentiality, not just with your external vendors, but with your own employees. So those kind of things don't happen later, that they don't have that ability to disparage you publicly without potentially at least giving them a cease and desist.
Yeah. I'd
And did
also like
you
to
find out
add,
about it, Jay, because you got sucked in from the IT
yeah,
side?
yeah, we had to pull email logs and all kinds of stuff.
mm,
A question for Brian, going back a little bit. You mentioned um, like what terminology would you use if you're not in the practice of meeting quarterly with your clients to do that business review? What terminology would you use that would get them interested in sitting down with you?
A lot of times I'll just say, love to do a deeper strategy session with you. We want to make sure that we are doing right by you, and we want to build that check and balance system. And to do that, we just need to understand a little bit more about, how you're operating overall and making sure that the technologies we're proposing are meeting your need. I think customers have gotten a little threatened by the business reviews because for a long time it was all about refreshes and thinly veiled
Yeah,
sales calls. And I
exactly.
don't care what you call them, Mike. I mean, call them just meetings, right? But it's more about, set the tone with an agenda that says, hey, we need to learn a little bit more about you. We're not sure we're doing right by you because we just don't know how you're operating overall. We'd love to just have a conversation of what you're trying to accomplish as a business so we make sure that we've got a check and balance system that if we're proposing something to you, it really is something you need, right? And again, all those statements are kind of with the win in mind for the person on the other side of the table. What are they going to gain from this experience? And I think that's why people shied away from the business review. They weren't gaining much in that experience. They were gaining a new bill,
Hmm.
for something that they may or may
Yeah.
not need. And that's where we have to change the game,
Yeah.
I think, today.
Well, I throw out another thing too is, when you think about like a marketing drip campaign, that drip campaign might be these little nuggets of information that, is providing value, and then eventually they might say, "Hey, yes," to a meeting. Similar thing is when we are providing value in, as to our clients, and if we are giving little nuggets of information, little nuggets of value that help them, that's not something you're saying, "Hey, I need you to spend money on," then they see that and they get that. They see the value you can provide where that QBR, TBR, whatever the cadence is, they're going to be more apt to want to sit down with you because then they're going to be like, especially if you're queuing it up and teeing it up right, that, I want to sit down and talk more specifically about your business and the value we can provide. They're going to be more apt to do that. Versus if every single time that you're talking to them, it is about spending, then, the whole idea of a meeting is going to be thrown out the door because they're going to be like, okay, so, every time you talk to me, it's a little spend here, a little spend there. If you want to meet, you're probably going to be talking about a big spend, you know? So, so yeah, so I love throwing out just those little nuggets of value, those little nuggets of information that just shows that you're here for them, well beyond just the technology component of it.
Also include in your request for a meeting and a bullet point at least that says, and how can we improve, what can we do better for you, what would you like to see us do more or less of. Give them that opportunity that they know that they're going to have a forum to kind of, I won't say air their grievances, but there are things that they probably want to see adjustment or more of or less of, and this gives them an opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I,
Any
I
other
would go
questions?
this, most of your business owners, if somebody was coming in for that meeting from one of your key vendors, what do you want to learn from them? What would you want as the person sitting on the other side of the desk? And kind of think in that mindset when you go make the same request.
Yeah. Other questions from you guys here live, or not seeing anything out on YouTube, but anything here live you guys have questions on? All right. So, let's talk a little bit more about, measuring impact. How should MSPs measure and prove the value of these strategic conversations, to those business owners that are skeptical of them?
So, we use a 5 by 5 scoring method for impact and likelihood that really creates a risk score. It's very standard out in the marketplace. And when you're looking at it, you're looking at, impact, not going to disrupt much about the business at a level 1. 2, it will totally take the business offline on a level 5. So when you start looking at, at the things that you're sharing with your customer that they need to look into, kind of help guide them on that type of scale. That's a 1 to 5 scale of, where does this risk really sit if it were to come true? The customer may tell you it probably will never come true, and you'll say, yep, that's the likelihood number in this equation. But really, when you look at the impact number, what would this mean to you if it really did happen? If we're a software company, right? If somebody came in and what penetrated and got your data, could put us out of business, right? You might lose all the trust of our customers, thus we lose the revenue and we're no longer in the game, right? That's a heavy impact. Now we've architected ourselves in a way to make that a low likelihood, but let's say my likelihood was medium. That's where you have the ability as as the MSP to go, look, you've got some doors that are open here, and we've got some solutions to close those doors. But it's high impact. This is what the outcome would be according to you, and you ask those questions along the way, hey, if somebody were to breach your data, what do you think it would mean to your business? I bet you, chapter and verse, most customers would say, oh, it could put us out of business, right? Between, monetary loss and reputation risk alone. And then you can start leveraging that as kind of the point to make when you're showing the impact story, the likelihood story. Hey, we've got a high likelihood of this risk happening because of obsolete machines. We don't have all the right technologies in play. We don't have a way to, if an incident happens, we might not be able to find the root cause, and it can repeatedly happen as a result of it. And then drive home those messages with your customer.
So as you talked through that, the thing that kept screaming through my head was tabletop, tabletop, tabletop. Those tabletop exercises, I think, are, most incredible way to be able to truly help the client understand, not just not just your liaison that you're working with, but all the critical, members of that organization that need to be part of that tabletop exercise. And Brian, what would you say is the biggest reason why MSPs steer away from doing these tabletop exercises?
Well, let's take a step back from the tabletop. You can't even do a tabletop if you don't have a business continuity plan to work from, right? So you've got to
Sure.
identify an incident response plan before you even do that tabletop. And that's usually when you start talking about why have MSPs shied away from it. They may not have thought through an incident response plan with that customer. They may have not met with them to understand where the communication points, because a big part of an incident response plan is not just the triage, it's who's going to talk publicly to the customers, hopefully, is as far as you need to go. But if it has to
Right.
expand to league, or if you're at the right size, even media, who are the people there? Then when you go to do the tabletop, I think where some MSPs worry in the tabletop process is they're going to expose something that they should have done, right?
Mhm.
But the real reality of the tabletop is we can't anticipate everything that's going to happen. And we're
Right.
doing the exercise to find where the gaps are in a controlled manner so we can then work to tighten those gaps as well. I know when I was an early stage MSP, your biggest fear was showing the customer you might not know something, right? Because we all only have the staff we have,
Yeah.
and technology moves much faster than we can, right? But the truth is, by doing these little tests, right, we're able to identify where those holes are. We get better in the process, they get better in the process, and we can control the narrative too. When we're doing a tabletop, if we find gaps, we're expressing what those gaps are to share with the customer. We're not doing it post-event, where now the event's happened and now they're pointing the finger at us and we don't really have any backing to stand on because we've never tested it. We didn't identify that gap and we're probably in the wrong.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as you were illustrating that, I think one of the things that came to light for me that I think we should illustrate to the client is that if we don't go through this tabletop exercise, there are going to be things that we didn't anticipate until this team of people within your organization came together and we walked through this plan. All of a sudden, we've uncovered something that, from a business continuity perspective, that there's a gap there. And, until, of course, we all know until you actually go through an incident that we don't want to go through, we are never going to know where the true gaps are. But the closest thing to that is going to be that tabletop exercise, right?
But if you look at it from a pure litigation perspective, right? If you're conducting regular tabletops and you're identifying gaps, nobody expects everybody to find all the gaps in life, right? And there's always going to be, the only way you can totally secure a network is take it offline,
Right.
unplug the machine, lock the door of the room the machine's in, and don't let anybody in, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality. So, here what we're doing is we're also trying to show, hey, we took the right steps throughout the process to do this. And each time there was a lessons learned component to it that really helped us in the organization get better. So we were ready for the next incident response. And the good news for most MSPs is as you continue to standardize your stacks, a lot of these incident response plans are going to look very similar in process, especially from the technical perspective. What's going to change is the communication and the players that are involved. And now you can really get a single tabletop text, test and be able to roll that out, far and wide throughout your organization because the technologies are very similar. You know where to find the data, and then you're running through it to see where are the process gaps. When didn't we notify the person at the right time? Again, it goes back to those human factors, which is always the bigger challenge than the technical factors.
And going back to a couple of things that you mentioned as far as, there's the fear that if I do a tabletop exercise, we might uncover something that we currently don't have in place that we should have in place. Or there's the fear of the unknown that something might come up, a question might come up that we might not have the answers to. Aren't we better off, uncovering those during a tabletop exercise than uncovering them when a true incident happens?
Well, look, I'm going to say yes to that, right? It
I
seems
mean,
pretty obvious,
rhetorical question, right?
but
But
that's in, but each group has its own thing. I think, some of that is, look, a lot of us in this industry were accidental entrepreneurs, right? We weren't planning on
yeah,
starting a company. Circumstances in our life might have had us all of a sudden go, I'm going to hang out a shingle and become an MSP today, right?
right,
And
right,
and if you do that younger, earlier in your career, you might just not have enough experience to know that that's the right answer, Dan, right? That it's
yeah,
okay not to know those things. There's a lot of imposter syndrome for early entrants in the MSP community because they don't feel they
sure,
know it all. Those of us that have been around a while, it's not that we know more or better. We've just got enough experience to know, well, look, hiding it isn't going to make it better. Bad news doesn't get better with age, as they say, right? So,
right.
we're just addressing it a little bit more head on, and we have a little bit more confidence to do so.
It's just the value, though, just there might be this this level of anxiety that we've uncovered something, we got a question that we don't have the answer to during a tabletop exercise, during a something that's not real that we're walking through. It's a hell of a lot better of a situation doing it then than a true incident happening and looking back and thinking, hell, if I had walked through this, we could have saved this client ABC. I could have saved myself from a major lawsuit. I could have saved this. I could have saved that. You know, put yourself in those vulnerable positions and understand that it's okay in those sick cases because you're doing the right thing to try to figure out what is going to be best for the client versus just waiting for an incident to happen. And then, you're in a really bad position.
But I go back to Mike's question earlier today. One of the challenges can be getting the customer involved in this too, right? Because they do
Sure.
need to be part of this tabletop testing. So it goes back to, frame that initial meeting as we want to get more in tune with your business and your strategy. And then you can totally turn around and kind of say, hey, as part of this process, we need to do tabletops just to, ensure that we've got the right conditions. And then, you as MSPs got to determine, should you start building that in as one of those soft costs into your MSP contracts, or will these be event-based costs when you do it? Because, obviously there's different sales considerations on both of those.
So, Brian, I want to have you give us a plug about VCIO Toolbox for the next 3 minutes that we have available. You guys
Sure.
provide. You guys provide. Sorry to put you on the spot, throw you in the
No,
hot
no, it's
seat.
all good. So,
Yeah,
basically we have two products within VCIO Toolbox. We have the VCIO or VCIO Toolbox VCIO stack, and then we have our Cybrance GRC system. The beauty of both of those systems, though, is they come together and unify data across the strategic layer, the roadmap layer, and the risk layer. So, if that is two different teams within your environment, they're coming together and you're making sure they're always unified in their story, especially about budget and not positioning things with different timelines and different prices. The goal of our platform is to foster better communications. The North Star for us has always been the strategic plan, working with the customer to better understand the objectives they're going after. We've said it plenty of times today, but we do it in a structured manner. So when you build those roadmap items, you're able to tie it back to the goals and the customer can clearly see the relationship, see the why behind each project, and then hopefully make a more informed, more controlled, decision. We have all the things that you'd expect to have in a QBR, product lifecycle management, gap analysis, but we're really working on expanding the integration base and really automating more of the data ingestion to reduce some of the work that you have to do, and certainly better showcase some of the outcomes that the customer should expect so they can make those decisions. We marry that up with the compliance side. We're seeing more and more of our MSPs starting to build out governance as a service, compliance as a service projects. And this really allows you to put that into a a net new recurring revenue opportunity for your business. Over there, we've got 3 core components within the system. Our GRC core tool allows you to do framework assessments. We maintain over 30 different framework assessments. Think your HIPAA, NIST, CIS, CIS, and others that you can evaluate against. We have the ability to collect evidence, organize evidence, so it can be shared out with auditors. Customers can collaborate with you. You can invite them into the experience so they can upload that evidence and contribute responses where you might not have them built. We have an advanced policy manager, so you can work with your customers to create and curate those policies. We have over 35 built into the system, but you can bring your own. And then you can manage the workflow, sending it out for officer approval, getting the end users distributed and signatures back into the system so you can really prove out that compliance statement. And then we have a third-party risk management module where you can send out those due diligence questionnaires that you've been on the receiving end of and really share with your customer where their vendor risk lives. And if you give those vendors time to remediate, track them and hold them accountable to actually finish that work. All of this is front-ended by a customer portal where folks can come in and engage as well, fully branded as you, of course. But this is where the collaboration and the vendor management comes in. So really, we've got all the tools found in common QBR tools and GRC tools built under one hood, and then unifying the strategic plan, the risk plan, and the budget plans.
Awesome. I threw a link into chat, and I will throw that out on YouTube as well. There's a link to learn more about VCIO Toolbox. I also have a link to Brian's LinkedIn profile. So if you haven't connected with Brian, be sure you do so. Brian's a great guy and has got a great organization to be able to help MSPs with that aspect. So
Just
all right, everybody.
one more, if I could sneak one more in before the end.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if you've got ConnectWise managed, let's say, as your PSA, is there an integration that hooks in there, pulls in the client information, looks at
we
the number
integrate
of
with
tickets
about
and stuff?
15 different tools. At the PSA layer, we import customers, contacts, your agreements, and open opportunities come in so you can build them into the roadmap. You can create new opportunities from our system. You can launch tickets from our system, and the full ticket lifecycle gets tracked there, as well as tracking ticket data for dashboarding. And then we've got site information and configuration items can come in from ConnectWise as well. Although you can pull those assets from alternate sources as well, depending on how you're architected.
You mentioned the frameworks, so then you can check off like HIPAA, and then as you're going down through your questions, it's going to pull all those related.
Yeah, we've got the HIPAA frameworks already built for you. We maintain those, Mike, so when there are new updates to those regulations, you don't have to worry yourself about it. We push those updates down to you and really try to make that a much more seamless process for you on that side. On the QBR side, you can tailor your templates to be whatever you'd like them to be. We absolutely provide you with a global library of them, but there we give you a lot of flexibility to tailor them to meet the needs of your individual businesses.
Cool. Thank you.
You bet.
Awesome. All right, everybody.
Just want to add one thing. When Brian was
Yeah.
talking about buying incentives before, another common buying incentive I see is, ooh, shiny.
Yes, exactly. Shiny, shiny, shiny. AI shiny. Right.
Yep, and honestly, that's what we're trying to govern against here. We don't want to just bring you shiny toys. We want to make sure they're meaningful, right? So help out with that story. Imagine if you tell your customer not to buy something, how much they're going to love you.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. All right, everybody. Thank you for your time. Brian, thank you for your time and knowledge.
And always appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you all for joining today as well.
Thanks.
Have a
See
great
you later,
rest of your day,
boys.
guys. Take care. Have a good one.
Take care.